Welcome to the new normal. So, in this first virtual AIOS, I would like to introduce our instruction course called Neovascular Glaucoma. It takes two to tango. As we all know, neovascular glaucoma is a challenging scenario in clinical practice. It represents more than 9% of secondary glaucoma seen in hospital-based settings. So a coordinated effort from both the glaucoma and retina department forms the backbone of NVG management. Today, our team of exceptional glaucoma and retina experts shall attempt to demystify the multidisciplinary approach to the management of NVG, hence two to tango. So we will be discussing a coordinated strategy which includes early diagnosis, treatment of retinal pathology, and the most appropriate medical and surgical management. Today, my team includes Dr. Swati Singh, who will be discussing early diagnosis, a stitch in time saves nine. I shall be taking up the role of laser, old as gold. Anti-VEGF therapy, the silver bullet, will be discussed by Dr. Ritesh Narula. Dr. Sagarika Patyal will be discussing augmented trab versus GDD. The buck stops here. Combined vitrectomy with posterior valve, fortune favors the bold, will be taken up by Dr. Avnindra Gupta. And finally, Dr. Suman Bala will be discussing the cyclodestructive procedures, biting the bullet. I now call upon Dr. Swati Singh, who is a senior glaucoma surgeon with many years of experience, and she shall be guiding and discussing the most important part of NVG management, early diagnosis. A stitch in time saves nine. Dr. Swati, please.
Thank you, Dr. Chitralekha. I'm just trying to share my screen. Okay, is it visible now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Very good afternoon to everyone. And thank you, Dr. Chitralekha, and thank you, AIOS, for this platform. So my topic is neovascular glaucoma, early diagnosis, a stitch in time saves nine. So we all know that neovascular glaucoma is the most aggressive form of secondary glaucomas and is characterized by growth of new fragile vessels on the surface of iris and angle as a consequence to a known systemic or ocular disease. This glaucoma is often rapid in onset and refractory to treatment, causing vision loss and intractable pain for the patient. Historically, in 1871, this disease was known as glaucoma hemorrhagicum apoplecticum because of the intense etiology, the symptomatology, and the hyphema associated with the disease. And later on in 1906, courts reported the presence of NVI histologically in CRBO patients. And later on, Chalice described NVI in DR patients also. So the management of neovascularization or neovascular glaucoma has come a long way from the time when enucleation used to be the only treatment and to the current time when we know that with careful monitoring of high-risk patients and a diagnosis at early stage, we can prevent the disease from happening or treat it. Of the different causes of neovascular glaucoma, the most important ones are the diseases that cause retinal ischemia, especially the diabetic retinopathy, central retinal vein occlusion, the hemiretinal vein occlusion, CRAO, chronic retinal detachment, and other diseases. Then inflammatory diseases, including chronic uveitis, then tumors of the eye, and some surgical or medical therapy, especially a radiotherapy done in eyes, and extraocular causes like carotid artery obstructive disease or ocular ischemic syndrome. So the pathogenesis was first described by Michelson, who pointed out that the ischemic retina signals release of vasoproliferative factors, and vascular endothelial growth factor is the most important of these factors, and this causes the induction of the entire signal transduction pathway. High levels of VEGF have been identified in the aqueous humor of patients with rubeosis and NVG. So this ischemia of the retina or hypoxia, this causes release of pro-angiogenic factors, and VEGF being the most important of these factors. This VEGF diffuses to the anterior segment and induces new vessel formation on the iris and in the angle. And this, along with the other proangiogenic factors like IGF-1 and 2, FGF, or platelet-derived growth factors, and the transforming growth factor, they cause proliferation of fibroblasts. So these two combine and make a fibrovascular membrane, which later on contracts and causes the closure of the angle by synechial formation. So the different stages of neovascular glaucoma are, the stage 1 is rubeosis. Here you can see new vessels which appear as a small vascular tufts, especially at the pupillary margin, and also in the at the root of the iris. These small vessels or buds from the capillaries and venules, they grow towards the surface of the iris, and then they start growing and branching. They arborize in an irregular fashion, unlike the normal iris vessels, which are radially arranged, and they have thick walls. While these vessels, they leak, and they can cause hyphema also. So at this stage, the IOP is normal and the angles are open. The second stage is the secondary open angle glaucoma stage. Here, along with the new vessels, the fibrovascular membrane also grows over the surface of the iris, and gradually reaches the, in the angle, it percolates through the channels of the trabecular meshwork and causes a blockage of the TM channels. This causes a reduction in the aqueous outflow, and the IOP starts rising in these patients. Finally, the angle closure glaucoma stage. Here, the contracture of fibrovascular membrane has occurred, and the patient gets, the angles are totally closed or zipped up, and the pressures are very high, and the eye, the patient is in severe pain, and the eye is inflamed. On examination, one can see a cryptless or a smooth iris surface with ectropion UV and a fixed and dilated pupil. So, talking of prevention, in neovascular glaucoma, to prevent the disease from happening, it is imperative that we target the population where either the disease has not set in, that is the pre-rubeosis stage, or the stage when the disease is in the earliest form, that is rubeosis. So an active intervention in these two stages can prevent the progression to neovascular glaucoma. And at this stage, the treatment that is offered by doctors is pan-retinal photocoagulation, depending upon the extent of rubeosis and the posterior segment ischemia, with or without an intravitreal anti-VEGF injection. However, in the secondary open angle glaucoma stage, a PRP and intravitreal anti-VEGF injections can cause reversal of neovascularization and delay the need for glaucoma surgery. In the last stage, that is secondary angle closure glaucoma, there is no role of prevention. So it is an interdisciplinary approach and teamwork, including the physician and the retina and the glaucoma specialist. Now, the management involves an early diagnosis, taking a meticulous history, a good clinical examination and investigations, control of systemic diseases responsible for the this retinal ischemia and neovascularization, control of retinal ischemia with the help of pan-retinal photocoagulation and anti-VEGF injections, control of intraocular pressure if it starts rising with the help of anti-glaucoma drugs, and steroids and cycloplegics for inflammation. The importance of a good ocular examination, a comprehensive eye examination, cannot be overemphasized. As many of our colleagues in peripheral areas, they do not have access to sophisticated equipments, and they have to rely totally upon their clinical acumen. It has been seen that neovascularization of the angle can be present even without an evidence of NVI. So gonioscopy is crucial in these patients and should be repeated regularly. The second investigation is fundus fluorescein angiography, and it helps us in finding out the extent and the degree of retinal ischemia, and also helps in deciding the treatment strategy. Then in patients where clinically NVI is not demonstrated, or patients who have a pigmented iris, one can do iris fluorescein angiography or angle fluorescein angiography to see or check for any aberrant new vessels that leak fluorescein. Other investigations that may be needed are a B-scan ultrasonography when the media is not clear, a UBM for tumors of the ciliary body, especially in young patients with the neovascularization. Then ERG or the electroretinogram. This represents the mass electric response of retina and measures the degree of retinal ischemia. So this ERG was one of the 4 factors that was described by Hare et al. And this is used for differentiation of ischemic from non-ischemic central retinal vein occlusion during the early and acute phase of the disease. Along with the ERG, RAPD of more than 0.9 log units and peripheral visual field defects and a visual acuity of less than 20 by 200 were thought to be having high sensitivity and specificity for development of ischemic CRVO. So another new test is OCT angiography, which is a non-invasive tool and is quite helpful in early detection of anterior segment neovascularization and follow-up, especially in patients who have fluorescein allergy. So a good systemic workup needs to be done, and an examination by a physician, diabetologist, cardiologist, or immunologist as and when required. So coming to some of the clinical conditions, the most commonly associated conditions with neovascular glaucoma, the PDR, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, this constitutes 33% of the rubeosis cases, and the incidence of NVI in PDR eyes was found to be 65% in one of the studies. A higher incidence was seen after a pars plana vitrectomy, lensectomy, or a cataract surgery, and after a PCR, detached retina. So similarly, CRVO doesn't need any special tests, and one can find out clinically. The diagnosis can be made. The ocular ischemic syndrome is one disease which is frequently misdiagnosed or remains undiagnosed, although it constitutes around 13% cases of NVG. And patient presents with variable symptoms, including ocular pain and attack of transient monocular blindness or TIAs without any other main symptoms. The pressure may be low in these patients despite a neovascular glaucoma and angle closure owing to this ciliary body hypoperfusion. The diagnostic tests are carotid Doppler ultrasonography, CT angiography, and MR angiogram can be used to find out the levels of obstruction. Then pan-retinal photocoagulation, this is the mainstay of treatment and also for the prevention of NVG. And PRP destroys the outer photoreceptor RPE complex and reduces the oxygen demand. And this allows for the diffusion of choroidal oxygen to the inner retina and reduces the stimulus for release of angiogenic factors. Finally, the anti-VEGF therapy, the most commonly used agent is bevacizumab or Avastin. It is an anti-VEGF, a recombinant monoclonal antibody directed towards the VEGF and inhibits the effects of VEGF. This intravitreal bevacizumab is used in neovascular glaucoma as an adjunct to PRP, metal in surgical therapy, or when the media is too hazy for PRP completion. It can be used intracameral also in a dose of 1.25 milligram in 0.05 ml to cause regression of neovascularization before a surgical intervention, but has a short life. Finally, the take-home message is a high index of suspicion is required for an early diagnosis of neovascular glaucoma. An absence of NVI doesn't mean absence of NVA. And NVG in eyes without an identifiable reason, or NVI in markedly asymmetric PDR and low IOP, and NVI persisting even after PRP, one should suspect ocular ischemic syndrome also. Then watch closely for patients after cataract surgery, PCR intraoperatively in vitrectomy, post-vitrectomy eyes, and after YAG laser capsulotomy, as they are at high risk of developing neovascular glaucoma. And finally, a vigilant eye can save another eye from blindness. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swati, for this lucid discussion on why a stitch in time saves 9. So I shall now proceed with the role of laser. Old is gold. So what is the role of pan-retinal photocoagulation in the management of NVG? PRP reduces NVI and NVA, and hence it assists in IOP control. So studies have shown that PRP significantly delays the need for glaucoma drainage implantation. Before we understand the role of PRP, we need to understand the pathogenesis of neovascularization. Whenever there is retinal hypoxia, there is hypoxia-induced VEGF production along with autoregulatory dilatation causing growth factor production. Both these factors together cause neovascularization. When laser application is done, there is a physical interaction of the laser with the retinal tissue, where we have RPE absorbing the laser light. The light energy is converted to thermal energy, and thermal energy causes denaturation of the tissue protein, resulting in cell death and coagulative necrosis, forming the laser scar. So what is the mechanism of the laser scar? Retinal PRP causing laser scar causes photoreceptor destruction and decreased oxygen consumption by the reduced number of photoreceptors. Hence, the oxygen flux from the choroid to the inner retina increases, causing improved oxygenation of the inner retina. The improved oxygenation of the inner retina, of course, causes decreased VEGF production and resultant decrease in neovascularization. It simultaneously also causes autoregulatory constriction of retinal arterioles, decreased hydrostatic pressure in capillaries and venules, and constriction of retinal arterioles and venules. This reduces growth factor production and again causes decreased neovascularization. So there are multiple ways of doing laser PRP, and commonly we use slit lamp laser and indirect laser ophthalmoscopy. The lenses used for doing PRP laser are the Goldmann 3 mirror lens, the pan fundoscope, Mainster, and the Boke lenses in the slit lamp, and 20 diopter and 28 diopter lenses for ILO. The slit lamp lenses have certain similarities as well as dissimilarities. So the Goldmann lens is a mirror lens, while the other three lenses are non-mirror lenses. The Goldmann lens also has a very high resolution and magnification, while the others have lower resolution. The laser spot magnification on the pan fundoscope lens is 1.4 times, in the Mainster lens it is 1.5 times, and in the Boke quadrospheric and super quad lenses, it is 1.97 and 2 times respectively. Hence, the Goldmann mirror gives a narrower field while the others give a much wider field. The most important point to be kept in mind is that the image formed by the Goldmann mirror is a virtual and erect image, while with the other lenses is a real and inverted. And that is very crucial while doing the laser PRP. A clinician encounters certain specific hurdles while doing PRP in NVG, and these are a corneal microcystic edema due to raised intraocular pressure. Sometimes there may be presence of hyphema. Also, the level of patient discomfort in a patient of NVG is much more as compared to other proliferative conditions. So we need to tackle all of them separately. Corneal edema can be managed by aggressive IOP management, both by oral and topical therapy, or sometimes infusion of mannitol. In certain situations, topical application of glycerine over the edematous cornea has a hygroscopic action and gives us a clear cornea for us to at least do the laser PRP, and even though it is a temporary effect of the glycerine. When we come to patient preparation for PRP laser, the first and the most important aspect is informed consent. We need to inform the patient the severity of his disease, the requirement and benefits from PRP laser, and the side effects and complications which are possible with PRP laser. Once that is done, we then proceed with preparing the patient. Topical anesthetic drops are applied in both the eyes that helps to reduce photosensitivity and Bell's reflex. The patient is then stabilized on the slit lamp, the chin is placed, and the patient's head is stabilized with the help of a headband. Here we are preparing the lens. So we are using the, as you can see, we are using the Mainster PRP lens. This lens has a concave surface which sits on the anterior corneal surface. We need to use a coupling fluid on the surface which comes in contact with the cornea so that there is no entrapped air between the lens surface and the corneal surface. Here you can see that I am instilling the coupling fluid. And then this lens is gently inserted along with the coupling fluid and placed on the anterior corneal surface of the patient. The slit lamp laser technique, which has been recommended, suggests 500 micron spot size, half to 1 spot size apart, 1200 to 1600 spots of moderate intensity divided into 2 sittings by the ETDRS study group. However, based on clinical situations, adequate modifications are made, and especially in case of NVG, where we need increased spot numbers and hence increased number of sittings. So PRP sitting in 3 divided sittings are like this. Here in the first sitting, we should be lasering the nasal retina and the inferonasal retina. In the second sitting, we do the rest of the inferior retina and the superior retina and mark out the temporal margin of the third sitting. And the third sitting, we complete the temporal retina and any peripheral retina possible. This is a short video of PRP laser being done on the slit lamp. You can see the accuracy with which the beam focuses. Here we are lasering the inferonasal part of the retina. It's an inverted image. This video was shot on the side view of the slit lamp with the help of a mobile camera. When it comes to PRP laser, there are certain tips and pearls which we should keep in mind. The power needs to be titrated based on the clarity of the media. We should aim for blanching with medium gray spots. The smaller spot size requires lesser power. The pen requires lesser energy. Pigmentation also requires lesser energy. The spots, when it comes to the spots, larger spots cause patient discomfort. Small duration spots are more comfortable. Round laser spots are more efficient. So on an average, 300 microns and 0.1 second duration appears to be the best setting. This photograph shows PRP laser, which has been done in the first sitting. Indirect laser ophthalmoscopy is also another brilliant method of doing PRP laser and gives better results in media haze, better visualization of greater area, better anterior retinal treatment. In case of a small pupil, 28 diopter lens can be used and is known to be a faster method in the hands of an experienced clinician. Here too, topical anesthesia is used since no precise spot size is available, so we should aim for 50% retinal coverage, one spot size apart. It's wise to mark out the posterior edge of the area to be treated and proceed anteriorly. Indirect laser requires the patient to be in the supine position. A few complications are choroidal effusion and macular edema, which are due to the inflammation of the laser treatment itself and can be avoided by dividing the treatment into multiple sittings. Visual field defects and night vision defects are unavoidable side effects, and patient needs to be counseled before the informed consent. So what is the final aim? The final aim is regression of neovascularization, which we can see in the images here, the first and the second image. So PRP laser, which started in 1950 and had a strong, beautiful evolutionary arc, has withstood the test of time, and even today in the modern era remains the gold standard in the treatment of neovascularization. Thank you. I now request Dr. Ritesh Narula, who is a multifaceted retinal surgeon, and he will take us through the anti-VEGF experience in neovascular glaucoma.
Chitraleka, can we have a discussion on these two topics before rushing in for the next talk?
We can, sir. Also, we have kept 9 minutes at the end for discussion. We can have it now also, it doesn't matter.
Ritesh, what do you suggest?
I suggest, sir, we complete the medical management. I'll finish the anti-VEGF because that will also come into part of the discussion. And we can have one discussion after anti-VEGFs. And then we can do the surgical part and do the surgical discussion later.
Right. You can then continue.
Okay.
I'll be sharing my screen, please. Am I visible there?
Yes, sir.
Very good afternoon to all. Thank you, AIOS. Thank you, Dr. Chitraleka, for inviting me to be a part of this instruction course. I'll be talking about role of anti-VEGFs in neovascular glaucoma. First of all, the first two talks have really made my job easier in terms of giving the background of using anti-VEGF. As we have been understanding, neovascular glaucoma is a kind of a severe intractable secondary glaucoma, the cause of which is predominantly coming from a hypoxia of the retina. Now, what it has been found that though inflammatory causes have also been reported with neovascular glaucoma, 97% of these cases are associated with retinal ischemia, and only 3% of cases of NVG are associated with inflammation without ischemia. And the common causes, as Dr. Swati pointed out, include the complete gamut of retinal vascular diseases, the diabetes, the vascular occlusion, the ocular ischemic syndrome, some rare causes such as post-radiation, the tumors of the eye, and less common post-surgery, post-inflammatory disorders such as Behçet's, BKH, and sympathetic ophthalmia. Also, neovascular glaucoma has been reported. Now, as it has been found out that the process starts with ischemia or hypoxia of the retina, which leads to formation of VEGF, which migrates into the anterior chamber, causing neovascularization of the angle in the iris, and then the subsequent effects of NVG. So herein, as I have highlighted out, an important factor here are the angiogenic factor. And it has been found that VEGF is the most important diffusible factor which has been found in these eyes with rubiosis and NVG. Though others have also been identified, VEGF is still the most predominant one responsible for these new vessels to grow on the iris and in the angle. So if VEGF is the main causative factor for neovascular glaucoma, anti-VEGFs definitely do have a role in the management. Let us try to see where do we place them. NVG actually, as Dr. Swati had again shown in her presentation, goes through stages. NVI, then you go, that's just the dubiosis, then you go into neovascular glaucoma with an open angle, and then neovascular glaucoma with an angle closure. Nicely represented in BJO, this statement which says that if in this particular disease I am able to remove the neovascular element, what I'm left with is an uncomplicated, either an open angle or an angle closure problem once the new vessel element is gone. So any treatment which targets neovascularization and is able to remove it is effective in managing neovascular glaucoma. There are two important considerations here. Briefly already being touched upon, I'm just touching upon them again here. It's very important to have a very high index of suspicion in all these retinal vascular disorders, because you can develop one NVI, NVA without even seeing any rise in IOP. So the first stage does not have any IOP rise. So normal IOP can have NVI, NVA. So you need to have a high index of suspicion. And number two, you can develop NVA without NVI. So in conditions which are known to cause neovascular glaucoma more predominantly like CRVO or HCRVO, it's important for one to do regular gonioscopy in these eyes so that you can pick them up early before the IOP rise starts to come in. Another important consideration I'll be showing with the help of a case here. This was a 68-year-old male patient who had diabetes and a drop in vision because of cataract, and 636, 660 was the vision, and he underwent a cataract surgery. Now this was his fundus, and he underwent a cataract surgery somewhere, and during the cataract surgery he had a rent, he had an anti-vitrectomy done, he had an IOL in the sulcus, and then he came back to us with neovascular glaucoma. So this case typically highlights 2 points. One, if you have a retinal vascular disorder, it's important to treat that first, because already in these cases, the VEGF volume in the circulating eye is very high. And if we are not managing the underlying disease properly, we are going to land up with issues. Number two, the moment you have a breach in the barrier, which separates the anterior chamber and posterior chamber, you're inviting these angiogenic substances to move from the vitreous into the AC, and thereafter you're going to be responsible for angle neovascularization and iris neovascularization. Moving further, now let's talk about how anti-VEGFs are helpful for us. There are two major roles of anti-VEGFs in neovascular glaucoma. The first is preventive, then is in the management. When we talk about preventive, what we are actually talking about managing the underlying diseases which are responsible for neovascular glaucoma. So anti-VEGF is now the mainstay of treatment, whether it is managing diabetic retinopathy or it is vascular occlusion or ocular ischemic diseases. Anti-VEGFs form a major chunk of our treatment armamentarium as retina specialists. We use anti-VEGFs quite frequently in managing these conditions. Understanding the relative risk amongst diseases is important. So we have CRVO, which is the most common cause causing NVG, followed by HCRVOs and PDR, followed by branch vein occlusions, and then the arterial blocks. Though Chitralekha rightly pointed out, PRP is the treatment of choice when we are targeting ischemic retina, especially if we can do a good laser in these eyes. But there are certain negatives of PRP wherein the role of anti-VEGF comes in. PRP is non-selective. We are damaging some bit of healthy tissue there. It causes quite a bit of permanent visual field loss. The regression of NVE with PRP is not immediate. It takes a few weeks for the NVE to regress, even NVI and NVA for that matter of fact. And most importantly, it can work only if the media is very clear. You can't do a PRP if the media is bad. So herein, the role of anti-VEGFs come in. There are multiple publications which have talked about the role of anti-VEGF in CRVO in preventing CRVO going into NVG. In PDR now, the protocol S therapy, actually protocol S DRCR group is also showing that in PDR, anti-VEGF is actually reducing the PDR. It is converting PDR into more quieter NPDR form. It improves visual acuity. It is saying that you need not even do lasers immediately if you're treating these eyes with anti-VEGF. Though an expensive modality in terms of managing PDR, but yes, it does regress the disease progression. That is proven by these trials. Now coming to using anti-VEGF in management of NVG. See, the problem with NVG management that has come up is because of the severe complexity of this disease. Number two, the disease happens, the NVG patient generally onset is very abrupt because that early stages are missed. IOP rise is way beyond which we normally see in other forms of glaucoma. Because of which there is a lot of corneal edema, the commonly used anti-glaucoma drugs are really not that effective. Even the traditional anti-glaucoma surgeries are also difficult in these eyes because of the new vessels being there. There's a lot of risk of intraoperative bleeding. There's formation of fibrovascular membranes which go into this, the trap openings and cause the failure of filtration surgeries. So the only option which gets left is using cyclocryo or cyclophotocoagulation. But the results of those are not very precise. So anti-VEGFs herein, they have a significant supportive role in IOP control. They either form in bevacizumab, ranibizumab, aflibercept, all have been found to be equally effective. They cause regression of the anterior and posterior segment neovascularization. You can give them intravitreally or intracamerally. And it takes about 24 to 48 hours for these injections to work in regressing the neovascularization. While with PRP, it may take up to 2 to 3 weeks. Also, they have a kind of an anti-inflammatory action. So the patient's pain levels and inflammation also goes down. But the problem is this regression is temporary and recurrence is possible. So one should keep that in mind. And at the first instance, the moment you get an opportunity, if you're able to save the eye with an anti-VEGF, you should add in PRP to have a more permanent result. A paper put out this very nice flowchart. And if you look at it, there are 2 points wherein anti-VEGF have come to play. So you start your patient with NVG, you reduce the IOP as much as possible, and you inject anti-VEGF. Injecting anti-VEGF at this stage, either you will be able to control the IOP. If you are able to control the cornea clears, you can go ahead with PRP. And if PRP is not possible, again, an anti-VEGF giving here is a good choice. So looking at this flowchart, there are 2 points wherein you can consider using anti-VEGF before you land up with taking a patient up for a surgery. And number of publications to support this particular aspect. This article from DMC Ophthalmology, they had about 39 or 44 eyes controlled on anti-VEGF treatment as short-term therapy. There's another paper from Westburt et al. And they also showed that they had a significant reduction of about 6.1 millimeter of mercury with patients who were treated with bevacizumab in NVG patients. Combination works better compared to PRP alone, as shown by this paper, wherein they found that the combination therapy had a more rapid decrease in IOP and more rapid regression compared to PRP alone. It acts as a useful adjunct to the trabeculectomy surgery. It reduces the risk of bleeding, improves visualization intraoperatively, and bleb function is better maintained if you're combining anti-VEGF along with glaucoma surgery. Add to it vitrectomy, which Dr. Gupta is going to talk about, further improves your success rates in managing neovascular glaucoma. Another interesting aspect which is coming up now is using these anti-VEGF agents in the bleb. at the end of a trabeculectomy to prevent fibrous proliferation and reduce the risk of left failure. In our institute, Dr. Harsh sir has been doing this in last, he has done about 5 to 7 cases, and he says the results are quite promising. So the take-home message here is anti-VEGF may not be the first line in management, but are definitely a very useful adjunct. They have a role both in NVG prevention and treatment. And in NVG, we need to have an aggressive approach to salvage vision, and wherein a rapidly acting agent like anti-VEGF therefore become an important key. Thank you.
Dr. Chitralekha ji, you are on mute.
Thank you, Ritesh sir, for this interesting talk on highlighting the various roles of anti-VEGF agents. AG sir, would you like to take up these presentations for discussion now?
Yeah. First thing, first question to Swati, what is, as a glaucoma surgeon, what disease you see most commonly presenting as central retinal, as NVG?
Sir, in practice, I mostly see PDR cases, the proliferative diabetic retinopathy cases, and CRBO cases also, but more of PDR cases. And what I've seen that in CRBO cases, the glaucoma is much more aggressive compared to the PDR cases, the NVG. And it doesn't give us much time. So a diagnosis, an early diagnosis is quite important in these cases.
So, do you have any protocol in all central retinal vein occlusion? When you before dilating the patient, you have to look for NVI. क्योंकि NVI जब dilate हो जाता है तब तो NVI दिखती नहीं है. Yeah,
yes, sir.
Every patient you take up for gonioscopy. What is the protocol?
The problem is that
what is the message you would like to convey?
Yeah. So the message that I would like to give is an undilated examination is must. The problem is that these patients mostly come to us after, they are being sent by the retina specialist for a glaucoma opinion. So unless the pressures are very high. So we have to pick the disease at the earliest possible time. And at that time, an undilated examination is must. In late cases, it's not very relevant to do an undilated examination because the disease is quite obvious, and it's the pre-rubeosis or the rubeosis stage that we need to do a meticulous examination. So an agonioscopy is must, especially in CRBO cases. One must do repeat gonioscopies even if there is no NVI, and check for NVAs. And this should be done. What I do, I repeat the gonioscopy, say in every 2 to 3 weeks time in these cases with ischemic CRBO especially.
And generally, ये बोलते हैं 100 days glaucoma होता है, तो is there,
yes,
you
sir.
start doing after 2 months or 3 months, or you start on day 1 only?
The time, the CRBO patient mostly presents early because there is a certain acute loss of vision. So this gives us ample time, and the gonioscopy should be done at the baseline gonioscopy should be with us, and then we keep following the patient. Dr. Ritesh wants to say something.
Okay. Thank you.
You've raised your hand.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to point out here, Dr. With regard to the same top point, that the onus of actually picking this up early is with us as retina specialists. By the time it goes into the glaucoma stage and we are sending it to the glaucoma surgeon, actually it is a little on a later side. So I would say the onus is in the hand of retina specialists, wherein all these CRVOs are following up. So as a protocol, what is recommended by CVOS study also, every CRVO patient should be undergoing a gonioscopy at each follow-up visit. Even if they are quiet at every 3 months interval, they have to undergo their gonioscopy at every follow-up.
And I would suggest that bad cases of diabetic retinopathy, they should be sent to the glaucoma specialist for gonioscopy as well.
I think all PDR cases deserve a gonioscopy.
No, what cases of PDR you are seeing as neovascular glaucoma? Like not every PDR presents with neovascular glaucoma.
No, not every PDR. Actually, I would like to give
Any
an
message
example.
to the audience? What should you see? Which cases should we look for NVG in PDR?
The patients who have like poor glycemic control, the blood sugars are not well controlled, and mostly neglected patients. Like in the past lockdown, I saw one patient who presented basically with IOP, raised IOP, and on a very magnified view examination on slit lamp, I found some tufts of new vessels. So then the patient went to Ritesh and he did a PRP. The patient got corona, the disease got worsened, but the presentation may differ. It may present either with a raised IOP, and when the pressures are not raised, one has to look for any evidence of neovascularization.
Chitralekha, you mentioned कि CR ये PRP करते हैं. You showed कि posterior pole ज़्यादा करना चाहिए PDR में. And is there any difference of opinion कि periphery ज़्यादा करना चाहिए? You should use LIO for more for in cases of NVG because the peripheral ischemia is more in these cases.
Sir, in NVG, we should try to aim for as much of ablation as possible. Unlike other PDRs, where we can be a little lenient because trying to retain some healthy tissue. Here in NVG, I think we are fighting a war to save the eye. So we should aim for as much ablation as possible, right from the posterior pole to the ora, as much as possible. So indirect, definitely laser, indirect ILO is definitely a more handier instrument.
So the point what you made, you have to ablate beyond equator till ora has to be done in mandatorily in all NVG cases. LIO with depression is a must in all NVG cases.
Depression is again a debatable topic depending on what type of, what is the precursor disease to NVG. So that I would take with a pinch of salt. But yes, as much as possible to ablate the retina in NVG.
Do you think any role of anterior retinal cryopexy in NVG?
So if the media is clear and it allows good laser, I would prefer to go and do the laser ablation. In case the media is not good and it's a hazy media and there's no other option with us, okay, ARC is also an option, but preferably laser if the media permits. That would be my approach, sir.
Ritesh, coming to anti-VEGF, any questions you like to ask Chitralekha?
No, thank you.
Ritesh, about anti-VEGF, you know the NVI melts with anti-VEGF. But the problem with anti-VEGF is it reappears within 15 days. So till how long and when you'll prefer with anti-VEGF, like you mentioned, key protocol S is there in place and we can practice protocol S without loss of peripheral fields.
So the protocol S was not looking at NVG per se. Protocol S was PDR. I just mentioned protocol S to support that anti-VEGF works in PDR. In NVG, anti-VEGF's role is predominantly to only help to get that IOP controlled so that we can do laser or we can do surgery. We can have a safer surgery and a safer laser or a more complete laser. Anti-VEGFs have just that emergency medicine role wherein they will rapidly reduce neovascularization, help us to get an IOP a little better, help us get a little clearer cornea, a little more dilating pupil so that we do a better PRP or a surgery, whichever, a safer surgery.
So no, one thing, what questions comes in my mind, one question comes, ki if the angle are occluded, how does anti-VEGF is going to help the patient?
So angles are occluded to reduce the pressure, anti-VEGF may not in that case be that great a unit. But if angles are occluded, when we give anti-VEGF, the iris neovascularization go away, the pupil starts to dilate. If we find that the cornea is there and we want to do PRP, very often if the angles are totally occluded with a fibrous membrane, in that case, we are already anticipating a trabeculectomy surgery or a valve surgery, wherein the role of anti-VEGF now is to have a safer surgery rather than to reduce IOP medically.
We'll go on to discussion in the last part. Who's Chitralekha, Dr. Sagrika is in.
Yes, and now I invite Dr. Sagarika Patyal, who is a beloved teacher and clinician of many decades, and she will explain the nuances of the two surgical approaches to NVG, their strengths and their weaknesses. Sagarika, ma'am, please. Ma'am is not in.
No, I am in.
All yours.
Darn it. I think. Then let Dr. AG do his speak, because I'm not being able to again go in. There's some problem. Anji, can you hear me? No, because I'm not being able to get in. I don't know what I have done. There's some problem that I've done. Let's not waste time. Let Dr. Gupta go ahead, and I'll speak after that.
I request Dr. Avnendra Gupta, who is a senior retinal surgeon and a mentor to many of us here, and to come and discuss the interesting aspect of the posterior approach to NVG. AG, sir, please.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can, sir.
So what I'll be talking is combined vitrectomy with posterior valve. Fortune favors the bold. I don't know whether I'm bold or it's a demand of time where we have to take unexpected steps to save the patient or to preserve the vision of one-eyed patients who are going blind. And that's why we came up with this procedure called posterior valve. Neovascular glaucoma, uveitic glaucoma, iridocorneal endothelial syndrome, epithelial ingrowth, post-penetrating keratoplasty are some of the refractory glaucomas which are unresponsive to medical therapy or challenging to manage with conventional surgical modalities like trabeculectomy. Glaucoma drainage devices have been used extensively for management of such cases of refractive glaucoma, especially if you see a patient of penetrating keratoplasty. We have done a glued IOL with a posterior valve. This patient had an intractable glaucoma. This patient has already underwent a trabeculectomy procedure. You can see a PI with pseudophakia, and this trabeculectomy has failed. So now we have planned this patient for posterior AGB with vitrectomy. The first question comes in mind: why posterior approach in neovascular glaucoma? Because of the recurrent inflammation, the corneal endothelium is compromised, the angle is vascularized. So if you place a tube or if you do a trabeculectomy, you are liable to damage the angle or the neovascularization in the angle, which can lead to bleeds, postoperative bleeds or intraoperative bleeds. In many cases, the angle is obliterated because of pus, and in these kind of situations, it's extremely difficult to place the tube in the anterior chamber or do a trabeculectomy. Small eyes with inadequate anterior chamber depth, the placement of tube is extremely difficult. So what we do a pars plana tube placement in these kind of patients after doing a total vitrectomy. NVG in posterior valve is preferred whenever you have a shallow anterior chamber. Vascularized angle can lead to intraoperative and postoperative bleeds. Inflamed eye and anterior valve can add on to the inflammation. So we do prefer a posterior valve in all these kind of patients. But this procedure also has a limitation. You cannot do this procedure in the phakic eye. The patient should be a pseudophakic. You need a complete retina setup, and a VR surgeon is required to do this procedure. So a glaucoma and a VR surgeon is required for a good surgical outcome. So you have to join with the two specialities to give a better outcome to the patient. Now we see a case of proliferative diabetic retinopathy with NVG, one-eyed patient, other eye it's pale negative because of NVG, uncontrolled IOP on maximal medication. 3 months back, cataract and trab was done in first sitting, but after 2 months of doing trabeculectomy with cataract, the trab failed. The pressure again went up to 50 on maximal medication. We had a fundus visualization, so we started doing a pan-retinal photocoagulation. We ablated the retina right from the ora to the posterior pole. And then we planned for pars plana vitrectomy with posterior valve. You can see this is a pseudophakic patient, and we put a traction suture. The valve is checked for patency with 30 gauge needle. 8 millimeters behind the limbus, we place the valve, and after putting silk suture, we make a 5 into 5 millimeters flap. Once the flaps are made, then trocars are placed. It's important to do an anterior vitrectomy because the valve tube will come just behind the lens. So all the vitreous should be removed from this area. Then we, under visualization, we go to the posterior pole. You can see a lot of laser marks. It has been well lasered. This white spots, what you can see is a laser marks. It's important to do a total, near total vitrectomy. So PVD induction is done with the help of tricot. You can see we are inducing the posterior vitreous, and the posterior vitreous is removed. Once the posterior vitreous is removed, the vitreous is also removed till the equator or beyond equator. We don't go for a very aggressive base dissection. 2 millimeters behind the limbus, we create an fistula. From this fistula, we introduce the tube inside the eye, and you can see the tube coming behind the IOL. Once the tube is placed, what we do, we suture the flap, and in all our cases, we are putting a sterile patch graft to the exposed part of tube, because initial cases we had incidents of tube exposure, and then the conjunctiva is closed. You can see a well-centered tube, and this patient actually had 636 vision. After surgery, improved to 612 vision, and the pressures are maintained nicely. It's coming 612. Like any surgery, this surgery also has a complication. In early phase, you can have hyphema because of NVI. So it's always better what Ritesh suggested. Before going in for surgery, you can put an anti-VEGF. So chances of hyphema will decrease. You can have hypotony like in any other filtering surgery or glaucoma. Vitreous incarceration of the tube can occur, and you can have an increased intraocular pressure. So you should make sure that the vitrectomy should be total. If this problem comes, then you can go inside and do a repeat vitrectomy. Vitreous hemorrhage, retinal detachment can occur in these eyes. And because of hypotony or sudden decrease in pressure, you can land up into a situation called choroidal detachment, which usually subsides over a period of 2 to 3 months. In late complication, you can have an tube exposure. Looking at this complication, we had 2 patients of endophthalmitis. Looking at this complication, what we started doing is we started putting a sterile patch graft on the exposed part of the tube. So our incidence or exposure of tube reduced, and now we don't have any after having sterile patch graft, we don't have any endophthalmitis patient. One patient landed up with an iris cyst. This is an article which we have published, that is pars plana AGV implantation in refractive glaucoma, surgical technique and long-term outcomes. In this series of 28 patients, the main cause of refractory glaucoma where we did this procedure was neovascular glaucoma. That was somewhere around 20% of the patient. The results, if we look at the results, the mean IOP was 38 millimeters. And after surgery, doing a pars plana vitrectomy with posterior AGV, the pressure reduced to 12.76. And with this patients are maintaining, we had a maximum follow-up of 3 years. And patients are managing good intraocular pressure with good increase in visual acuity. If you look at the IOP, there was a statistically a statistical significance of reduced IOP. The patients had a primary outcome and a secondary outcome. 60% of the patient maintained a primary outcome where they didn't needed any anti-glaucoma patient. Rest of the patient needed 1 or 2 anti-glaucoma drugs. Other finding what we see in this study was the visual acuity. Visual acuity improved in somewhere around 52% of the patient. 30% of the 48% of the patient had the same vision, and 2 patients had decreased vision after surgery. So to conclude, AGV implantation through pars plana can be a secure and successful option in patients with NVG. It effectively lowers the IOP and reduces the number of glaucoma medication, and is especially successful in patients where filtering surgery has failed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abhinendra sir, for this stimulating talk, and we all appreciate the magic which lies behind your skill also. Sir, I have a question. Can I ask that now?
Yeah.
Sir, have you noticed any difference in the incidence of endophthalmitis in posterior valve as compared to the incidence rates in anterior valve?
Just a second. How can I stop sharing my screen?
If you close that window, it will stop sharing.
Sir, either in the top or in the very bottom of your screen, you would get an option of stop sharing. It would be a tab in green or red color.
Okay, stop sharing. Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Yeah. Yes, Chitralekha.
Sir, I was asking, have you noted any difference in the incidence of endophthalmitis in the posterior valve as compared to anterior valve placement in the incidence rate?
The incidence is almost the same. The thinning usually starts occurring after 1 year to 2 years. And what we have seen in some of the patients, the tube gets just subconjunctival. The sclera above it, it erodes the sclera and becomes subconjunctival. Once the sclera becomes subconjunctival, tube becomes subconjunctival, the patients are more prone to get endophthalmitis. So you have to recognize this, and we are recognizing these situations. And the moment it gets superficial or subconjunctival, we are putting a scleral patch graft over it, thus thereby preventing chances of endophthalmitis.
Thank you, sir. I would like to now request Dr. Sagarika Patyal, who will now present her talk on the strengths and weaknesses of the 2 surgical approaches in NVG. No.
Is it visible now?
Yeah, it's visible.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
So sorry for the little glitch. It's a wonderful topic that has been chosen by Chitra, and it's been so beautifully done up by each one of the speakers just before me. And the onus of talking about surgery lies with me, and the 2 commonest types of surgery, augmented trabeculectomy versus the aqueous drainage devices. Does the buck stop here really? I don't know. Now, if we were to look at the pros and cons of both the diseases, let's have a look at it. There was a survey which was done between 109 glaucoma specialists and 130 retina specialists, because there is no consensus as yet on NVG management. The best thing was that there was agreement between both the subspecialties on the use of anti-VEGF, which Dr. Nirula has so beautifully talked about. this was the first kind of treatment. But I also feel that, PRP is absolute essential. We have saved so many eyes by just these two things. And along with that, glaucoma surgery. And all the glaucoma specialists at each stage of the questionnaire that was put forward, the survey that was put forward, they all said, voted for surgery hands down. Problem with this particular disease is that the success is very poor. And we have to know, when do we operate? Do we operate in the open angle stage? No, we generally don't. We are able to control the pressure since we have already put the anti-VEGFs and done the PRP. So we have to do surgery when there's insufficient intraocular pressure control, despite giving maximum medical therapy. There's also this extensive, that means he's already gone into the person has already gone into the angle closure stage. And there's extensive peripheral anterior synechia that occludes the ankle and prevents aqueous flow. The three commonest methods by which treatment is given by surgery is trabeculectomy, aqueous drainage devices, and cyclodestructive procedures. But since the buck has stopped between the two of them, trabeculectomy and aqueous, I will only discuss these two. Now, you will just say, why do we choose trabeculectomy? See, trabeculectomy is very easily performed by all surgeons. We start teaching it very, very early. When they are postgraduates, they see it, and their fellows, they learn it. Simple instrumentation, minimal complications are there. No, minimal, I'll not say minimal. They can be maximal if it is not done properly and not with doctor. It has also replicable, and it has a very short learning curve. Reliable, relatively predictable in hands which have done repeated trabeculectomies. We know that this is the stage where we can sort of control it, and this is the way we can look after by doing the surgery the correct way. And it has practically a straightforward technique. It's pretty cost effective also. Plus in India, even primary trabeculectomies are being done because people come so late to us. They do not adhere to various treatments, and the economics of it. Most important is economics. And therefore, when a poll was conducted, even in the GSI meeting in 2000, most of the glaucoma specialists, not primarily for NVG, but as such for all glaucoma surgeries, voted for trabeculectomy with the concurrent use of MMC, mitomycin C. Without mitomycin C, the chances of failure are very high, and we only think about twice in cases of JOAG or in cases of high myopia, where MMC we will be very chary of putting. Now, again, trabeculectomy, in case the people have already done a PRP, already done an anti-VEGF, then why should we go ahead and do it? Now, let's have a look at this surgical technique. As I have said, that it has been refined over so many years. Just a minute, I'm trying to remove this from my box so that my surgery, I can show you surgery. This particular surgery has been done by Dr. Vinay Gupta, and it's a beautiful surgery. That's why I put it over here. What is very important is that we must remember to put our releasable sutures, adjustable sutures, learn when to do the suture analysis properly. And very important is that we must not do too much of cautery, and yet do just adequate cautery so that our delineation is very, very good. Addition of anti-metabolites, it's been found that 55% of success rate in the mean follow-up of 35 months with the use of post-operative 5-uracil, fluorouracil, which I don't use. And most people have stopped using, most people use mitomycin, and success of 54. That means practically both of them, that is mitomycin and 5-fluorouracil, when used correctly, we find that the results are pretty good. And very important is the application of more field-safe surgical technique. Go posteriorly as much as possible. We'll take your mitomycin sponges as far as possible, go behind. And also the use of anti-VEGFs. Now, these anti-VEGFs can be given intracamerally, or we can give it even subconjunctivally. Mind you, that these anti-VEGFs, which has not been touched upon, that we can, rather touched upon by Dr. Ritesh, that we not only use it during trabeculectomy, or rather before trabeculectomy, but we also do it for in case our blebs are failing. And this has been, we have found that it gives extremely good results. We can also do by Elgin and all, et al. Before probably these anti-VEGFs had come into the scene, they were also doing cautery of the peripheral part of the iris because of the immense problem of bleeding which occurs in NVG cases. Now, even collagen implants have been tried along with that subscleral amniotic membrane. In the photograph that I have shown out here, This is the thin amniotic membrane which I have placed on the patient subsclera, and then this prevents a lot of fibrosis which takes place. Again, the releasable sutures, I put the Wilson sutures, and with this quadrangle sutures that we put, we find that you can take it out at the slit lamp whenever you want. You can titrate the intraocular pressure so well by means of these sutures. You can put any type of releasable sutures which works well in your hand. In my hands, this works extremely well. Now, what about intraocular pressure control with trabeculectomy? In a very good study which has been quoted practically everywhere by Takihara and all, and he said that trabeculectomy with mitomycin C for intraocular pressure lowering in NVGI's success of, he is quoted a success of 62.6% at 1 year. This declines to 51.7% for 5 years. But they had done it in NVG cases with secondary to diabetic retinopathy. And one has to remember that it's very difficult to say that, okay, this case will succeed and this will not, despite doing a very, very good track. Now, what are the, causes, what are the causes of failure, and what preventive measures can be taken in order to save our TRAB and help the patient? Because the biggest problem is hyphema, bleeding during surgery. Now, this pre-op bevacizumab, it decreases the post-operative hyphema. It improves the success of trabeculectomy with mitomycin C, even up to 95% of cases. And it can be used pre-operatively, intraoperatively, post-operatively. And not only for the TRAB, it can be used, as I said, for failing TRABs, even during bleb revision. And again, we can go by all the three methods: intracameral, intravitreal, subconjunctival. And it has been done by all of us, and we know that it works extremely well, because when we have an eye which has got less of NVI, and with that also reduced intraocular pressure by means of giving anti-VEGFs, we find that before the trabeculectomy, it definitely improves our success rate. If you would put good pre-placed sutures, because mind you, once the bleeding starts, if you don't have sutures in time, if you put the pre-placed sutures, it helps you so much to quickly to suture the wound and prevent the bleeding. Even intraoperative sodium hyaluronate, just put it in where the bleeding is taking place, and then you find suddenly it avoids that sudden decompression, which leads to intraoperative bleeding. Because the moment your eye is so firm with the high intraocular pressure, you make a hole into it in order to go for the trabeculectomy, and there's sudden decompression, and you find the whole eye is flooded with blood, and you wonder where the blood has come from. It's happened to me, so I know what happens. Now, you must use releasable sutures, and must release the suture, laser suturalizers at the appropriate time. Doing it too early or too late is not, it's not helpful. Therefore, these patients must be called, more earlier in order to titrate the wound and know when to do the suturalizers. And you can also use this 5FU or MMC. I have used MMC post-operatively in order on the bleb itself by means of a sponge, so that we can decrease the amount of vascularization. Now, there was another condition, the UNOL, they have looked at, two types of patients. One was combined trabeculectomy with ranibizumab, and the AGV group, that is the Ahmed glaucoma valve group. 11 eyes of both of them, they achieved full success. In cases of the AGV group, on one hand, we found that 6 eyes failed, and complications were more, especially in the early post-operative period. Mind you, hypotony is a very big problem. All of us, when we are doing our AGVs, we always put in sodium hyaluronate into the anterior chamber, so that that sudden drop or hypotony which occurs in AGV can be obviated. And we can have a shallow chamber as well as hyphema. This, of course, is not been seen by every other, let's say, researcher, but this particular paper has talked about this particular problem that occurs more in AGV than in TRAB. But TRAB, don't think it is very simple. A TRAB can have huge complications like bleb leaps and infections, blebitis, endophthalmitis, and it's not in the immediate post-operative period. Years later, the patient may come here and then he lands up with an endophthalmitis because of the infection that is there. You can have hypotony and hypotenuse maculopathy when you get to see them, and these are vision threatening complications. So one has to be extremely careful and learn to manage these cases very, very thoroughly. And of course, it has very bad prognosis when there's conjunctival scarring. Very important factor that I talked about is the economics of a particular surgery. You have a TRAB on one hand, and you have, let's say, the commonly used Ahmed glaucoma valve on the other hand. McPhee has found that in India, it is in New Delhi where the highest cost of a TRAB is about 34,000 rupees. But now just compare it with an AGV. The cost of just the valve is 26,000 rupees. Forget the rest of it, the surgical costs. And if we have the Aravind device that has come up, that has also a pretty steep learning curve, and not all of us are doing it. But that is very, very cost effective. It is only 5,000 rupees. But this is a non-valve device. What we are not considering is the cost of follow-up. Patient who has undergone a trab or a tube has to come for repeated follow-up. And the cost of medicines, mind you, it is not just the post-op of surgery, but also that you fact that you might require anti-glaucoma drugs, reoperation costs, blood needling costs. All these are huge burden, financial burden on the patient. Now comes various valves that we are going to use. The commonly used valves, I'm going to talk about them, that is Marvelt and Ahmed. Now, these have come into increased use because of improvements in design and use of more biocompatible materials. But the greatest impetus to the use of the valves has been by the TVT study. Now, if we look at just the pros and cons of the what happens with trabeculectomy with MMC and tubes, one is that both of them show a pretty good reduction in intraocular pressure. We find that in tubes, definitely, we need to give extra anti-glaucoma medicines in the first 3 years of surgery. But again, after 3 years or so, you find that practically all of them become the same. The serious complications of vision loss, reoperation are practically the same after both the procedures, and no rate of vision loss after both the procedures after 3 years of follow-up. Cataract progression, of course, occurs in both of them. Now, let's say, why GDDs? Why? I'm saying that it is so expensive. So why should we go ahead and use a GDD? Low risk of infection. It's a very easy procedure. Look, the surgery that I'm doing, you've got to prime the valve, push the valve, create that pocket, push the valve inside, then suture the valve very nicely. I do it with 80 silk. And after that, measure the tube, where there's the tube going in, and then do not use very big gauge needles, preferable that, and then you allow it to be placed inside the anterior chamber, the tube that is, then place cover the tube very well with the help of a preserved sclera. Even cornea will do, and that will help the patient, and that will also prevent some of the complications of the tubes. So the IOP lowering effect of these tubes is definitely maybe long lasting. It's a straightforward technique. It may be implanted and now with scarred conjunctiva. And this is where this particular tube or is definitely wins over a trabeculectomy, where we are unable to get good success in trabeculectomy when we have scarred conjunctiva. And there are less bleb-related complications, and the patient also can use contact lenses post-operatively. But what are the deterrents to the use of these glaucoma drainage devices? One is the cost. And the tube-related complications, there can be corneal decompensation. I will show you certain pictures after this. There can be conjunctival erosion and tube retraction can occur. And in fact, in younger patients, we have seen that the tube just goes back. It can be implant exposure, tube retraction. In a case of AGV, we will have a hypertensive phase. Therefore, the patient has to be called back after 1 month or so, because we know that the pressures are going to rise. It may not decrease pressure as well as trabeculectomy. You might require supplemental medical therapy. And of course, sometimes we find that there's a huge cosmetic appearance concern regarding the bleb over the shunt, as well as the patch graft may be visible, which is very annoying to the patient. There can be motility disorders, hypotony in case of non-valve devices. There can also be, as I said, conjunctival erosion, encapsulation failure, cataract progression, vitreous hemorrhage, retinal detachment. And this is the picture of one of my patients who had an AGV, a tube, and you can see half the cornea was having a haze, almost corneal opacity. And this tube was not draining. And you can see that, the tube was, the entire plate could be seen. There was no bleb at all. You can see the tube, the margins of the tube. Nothing was. Can I continue, please? Can I continue? And then this is of a patient who had the sclera had been thinned out and vortex had been placed, Dr. Abhininder Gupta. This is one thing that we have used. And 1.5 years post-op, we found that the results were extremely good and there was no exposure. Encysted bleb, this is in a child, 4 years old. And the iris may also get enmeshed in the tube, and along with that, it can touch the cornea and cause corneal opacities. we have to remember that success rates of GDDs and NVG are definitely lower in compared to other indications. And even if they do a PRP or concurrent use of anti-VEGFs, we find that it does not decrease. If we look at various studies, we find that 24 months has been the longest time and only 60% decrease in intraocular blood pressure. And therefore, you look at the success rate of AGV and you look at trabeculectomy, mitomycin, it's almost the same. And if you have a vitreous hemorrhage along with that and NVG, then we find that there's greater reduction of IOP with AGV over trabeculectomy in these cases. The Ahmed-Barveld comparison study, in which there was 29% of NVG eyes had been used, they found that the success rate was pretty almost the same. But very important is that the Barveld tube that has many more vision-threatening complications. Now, another express shunt which has been used also, this express shunt, we have used it long ago. Now it is no longer being used, and it's been used by people. Almost, the success rate is not all that good in these cases. And various other procedures like canaloplasty, trabectome, express shunts, but these are mainly for the open angle glaucomas, do not really succeed in the angle closure glaucomas. If you look at with the Ologen group, then in this case also we find that it is not very, very effective. If you compare the 3 implants, AGV, Barveld, then the Keki Mehta implants also, there was not much significant difference amongst the 3 implants. So the question is, what should we use? I would prefer to go ahead, do a good PR. First of all, recognize the condition. To answer one question that Dr. Arvinder Gupta asked, and I would like to say this, we do not know, most of the patients do not know when they developed diabetes. So it is always better when the patient first comes, do an undilated thorough examination. Forget whether the patient, how long was the patient's duration of diabetes. And after that, go ahead and do a thorough examination of the for NBI. Search brilliantly for definitely for NBI. Do a good gonioscopy and do repeated gonioscopies. And therefore, I would prefer to do get a PRP done, and then after that, an anti-VEGF, and go ahead and do a trabeculectomy. If that goes in for failure, try to revive the bleb, and then go for a GGD. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for this vibrant and informative discussion on TRAB and GDD. I now request Dr. Suman Bala to conclude the entire IC by discussing cyclodestructive procedures. Dr. Suman is a glaucoma surgeon, and she will teach us that the battle against NVG continues till the very end. Dr. Suman, please.
Just I'm sharing my screen.
सुमन नीचे की ओर ना शेयर स्क्रीन लिखा हुआ है. हाँ, आप दिख रही है तुम्हारी स्क्रीन. Yes, we can see your. We can see your presentation, Suman.
Yes.
Make it full screen. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you are audible also.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Chitleka, and thanks AOS for giving me this opportunity. My topic is cyclodestructive procedures, biting the bullet. Now we have done laser photocoagulations and anti-VEGF for retinal ischemia. We have tried filtration surgery and glaucoma drainage devices to decrease elevated IOP. Everything has been tried, but still the IOP is not under control. Here comes the role of cyclodestructive procedures. Cyclodestructive procedures decrease IOP by destroying ciliary epithelium of ciliary body and reduce aqueous secretion. Now, when to offer cyclodestructive procedures? In end stage of neovascular glaucoma, in cases of failed trabeculectomy or tube shunt procedures, when there is total synechial angle closure, no useful vision remaining, and control of pain becomes the primary therapeutic aim. In cases of poor surgical candidates who cannot tolerate incisional surgery because of poor general condition or having conjunctival scarring from previous surgery prone to infection, they are better candidates for CPC. And in emergent situations, in cases of acute onset of neovascular glaucoma, when we can't do incisional surgery because of inflamed eye, so to buy time, we can do these procedures. Now, these procedures should be avoided in cases of thin sclera, ciliary staphyloma, limbal deformation, and scleritis. There are various ways to destroy ciliary epithelium, but I will discuss about cyclocryotherapy, diet transscleral cytophotocoagulation, micropearls, endoscopic cyclophotocoagulation. Cyclocryotherapy, although it's a painful procedure and better machines are available now, but still it is commonly used because of its cost effectiveness and availability. Never forget to take consent. This is must. Patient should be clearly explained about possible risks, benefits, and complications in written. Preoperatively start with topical steroids and cycloplegics to decrease inflammation, continue anti-glaucoma medications, and NSAIDs to inhibit post-operative prostaglandin release. In cyclocryo under peribulbar or retrobulbar block, a cryoprobe with a diameter of 25 mm is applied. Freeze the area 2 mm behind the corneal limbus and press the probe against the sclera until a 3 to 4 mm frozen zone is formed. The probe freezes each side at minus 80 degrees Celsius for 40 to 60 seconds. Post-operatively to control inflammation, topical steroids every 1 hourly, oral steroids if inflammation is severe, NSAIDs for control of pain and discomfort, cycloplegics, NSAIDs, narcotics as needed. Continue anti-glaucoma medications as hypotensive effect of cyclocryo may take several days to develop. Repeat cyclocryo can be done if IOP is not controlled. You should wait at least 1 month before repeating the treatment. You may retreat the initial sites first to avoid overtreatment. Additional spots may be added if deemed necessary. However, total treatment of more than 300 degrees is rarely, if ever, indicated. Most common complication in NVG cases after cyclodestructive procedure is hypotony, phthisis, and sympathetic ophthalmia, corneal decompensation, surgically induced necrotizing scleritis, and retinal detachment may occur. Now, transscleral cytophotocoagulation. Success rates are of the order of 70% initially, but drop to 50% at 2 years. In this, we use a G probe and with a power settings of 1.75 to 2.5 watts, place the edge of the probe at limbus, which centers fiber optic 1.2 mm posterior to limbus. Edge of the probe is placed in center of previous spot for each subsequent lesion, that producing 24 spots over 360 degree. But in NVG cases, we can treat 12 spots to avoid post-op hypotony. Low and slow treatment should be used because it minimizes the inflammation of tissue. Avoid 3 and 9 o'clock to avoid long posterior ciliary nerves and vessels. In this study done by Ramil et al. In 2012, they concluded that higher incidence of hypotony after DLCP in cases of neovascular glaucoma is associated with high use of high energy level. So they concluded that energy level should not be too high in the treatment of neovascular glaucoma. There has been various studies done on DLCP with combination of different treatment. In a comparative study done by Anthony et al., they did comparison of transscleral cytophotocoagulation alone versus versus combination of transscleral with diode laser and intravitreal bevacizumab, and they concluded that the addition of intravitreal bevacizumab to transscleral cyclophotocoagulation did not statistically advantage the treatment outcomes. Now, micropearl cytophotocoagulation. This is a relatively recent addition to cyclophotocoagulation and performed with Cyclo G6 laser system, provides similar efficacy to traditional transscleral continuous wave cyclophotocoagulation, but with an improved safety profile. Micropulse laser that subdivides the energy into short pulses with specific on and off times that minimizes the heat buildup and hence thermal damage to the adjacent non-treated tissues. This non-continuous nature of MP therapy decreases the aqueous production without destroying the targeted tissues. Unlike the traditional G probes, continuous delivery of laser energy which leads to focal destruction. In MPCP, we use a special probe, MP3 probe, that is positioned perpendicularly with the coupling agent, and the edge of the probe is placed at the limbus. And in this, we can use a sweeping motion from 9:30 to 2:30 and 3:30 to 8:30 clock position. And common power settings are 2000 milliwatt. In this study of micropulse versus continuous wave transscleral cytophotocoagulation, there was 75% success rate in patients treated with MPCP and with similar IOP reduction in both groups. And complication rate was higher in continuous wave treated eyes. And in a recent study, 2020, done by Hazem Helmi, they concluded that adjunctive use of intravitreal ranibizumab with MPCP may improve results and decrease complications. Now, endocyclophotocoagulation, this is a better way to treat target ciliary processes, commonly used for earlier stage of glaucoma. It's an invasive procedure, often combined with cataract surgery. Probe is entered through clear corneal incision after inflating the sulcus with halon GV in the dilating pupil. The laser is applied with a power of 0.25 watts in a continuous mode, and endpoint is whitening and shrinkage of the ciliary processes. If pop sound is there, then it shows the over treatment. You can reduce the energy. Optimal distance between the laser probe and tissue is about 2 mm. Histopathologic studies have confirmed that ECP causes less tissue disruption than transscleral cytophotocoagulation. This is a light microscopy of normal ciliary processes showing their lacy pattern, and this is TCP treated tissue showing the coagulative necrosis of the underlying ciliary staphyloma and adjacent tissue. And in post TCP, we don't lose the architecture of ciliary processes. A prospective comparative study between endoscopic cyclophotocoagulation and the AGV in refractory glaucoma, they concluded that there was no difference in the success rate between the two, but the eyes that underwent AGV had more complications than those treated with ECP. So the take-home message is that meticulous patient selection should be there. Informed consent is must. Use low energy over longer duration to avoid complications. With the introduction of novel technologies such as ECP and MPCP, its role is expanding in less severe diseases also. But still, cautious use of these procedures should be there because of the risk of phthisis and sympathetic ophthalmia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suman, for this detailed presentation on the management of end-stage disease. I think we are running short of time. Yes. So I would like to just conclude this session by thanking all the members of my team for sharing their knowledge and experience in helping us to better understand the multidisciplinary approach to neovascular glaucoma. It was a pleasure to be part of such an esteemed team, and I hope we were successful in our humble attempt to demystify neovascular glaucoma. Thank you so much. And thank you, AB team also. And a special thank you to AG sir for keeping us on our toes throughout the presentation.
Thank you, Chitralekha.
Thank you, Chitralekha. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritesh
Okay,
sir.
okay,
Thanks,
Ritesh,
Swati
bye.
ma'am.
Thank you.